You know, they say the trails that run along the riverbank up there, certain areas where you'll see that still the trail is indented into about a foot, because they said those trails been used for hundreds and hundreds of years by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation up and down the river checking their fishing spots. There's a site over in Port Moody Inlet that predate God. I mean, 9,000 years, 7,500 years, 4,700 years. It was us. So that's my main concern right now is, what does the future hold?
I'm going to start that again, sorry.
That's okay, take your time.
Okay. Tsleil-Waututh na qualitative na siam na siya Tsleil-Waututh ni quatset alap at quiqualawan qualawan at Tsleil-Waututh Nation. To all of you, my dear family, dear friends, we are very grateful that you are here to watch the thoughts and the feelings of our Tsleil-Waututh people. Tsleil-Waututh to Siwan Ash at Tsleil-Waututh Nation. We are grateful to the ancestors of our Tsleil-Waututh people. Nish Kwas Kwams Ashton to Siwan Ash. Our ancestors were very strong. Nish Kwas Achwistis Ashton Kwa Ait Seatwis E Ait Snowish at Tashnemith. Our ancestors, they gave us strong teachings and strong ways of being to help us in our life. On behalf of our Tsleil-Waututh people, our administration, our leadership, and our elders, we invite you to come and witness again the thoughts and the feelings of our people. It's the desire of our community, of our staff, of our administration, of our leadership to learn and understand what it is that our people want, and to use that as a guide for the work that we do.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying. That's all that counts.
So whenever you're ready, I'll clap.
I'm waiting for you.
Right now?
Yep.
My name is Venantia Rivera George. I'm the relationship specialist for Tsleil-Waututh Nation. The comprehensive community plan, it breathes Tsleil-Waututh. The Tsleil-Waututh people, this document is like a canoe, and it is being guided by the people. I'm very proud to be advocating for that, and I'm very passionate about this document. And I'm very grateful to be sitting at these tables with the individuals that I've looked up to for many years. So it's an honor to be a part of this.
The comprehensive community plan is a really, really important piece of work. It's a really important plan. So we have a guided process that is including all of the community members to determine what the future of their community is going to look like.
We had done comprehensive community plans, or CCPs, in the past. The most recent one being the one they did back in 2015 with a consultant, and they did a lot of very great and very innovative work. But now for this comprehensive community plan, this is really being done by the community for the community.
They know best what their needs are and what the needs of their children are and what the needs of their families are. They hold that knowledge, the cultural knowledge, and it's important to take that information and incorporate it into the community vision to make sure that the best of the best in the community is reflected when we're planning the future of all of the work that we do here at Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Ni wa ni tashnimis.
My people have been here in this area. We populated both sides of this inlet from Indian River way past Horseshoe Bay. There were thousands of us. We weren't sitting in our house doing games. We had to be called in. Our parents would have to call us supper time, and we'd be always playing out. And if we needed to, we could go to any creek on the reserve. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe more than that. And we could just go and just drink right out of the creek. We could swim all day. We could paddle way out. We'd get on logs and pretend we're in a canoe race. And we'd paddle way out, and we could look down and see the bottom. Yeah. Oh, and we used to eat. My mom loved clam digging. She'd even go out with a lantern at night and dig clams. She made wonderful clam chowder. Oh my God. And my dad loved to fry the oysters, crabs. He'd have the same pot on the beach, and then he'd take salt water and put it on the fire. Then we'd go way out and he'd get all these crabs. And then with the water's boiling, he'd throw them in, and we'd just sit down there and just feast. He'd put clams around it, and when they open, they're ready. Yeah, it was like a dream, the way life used to be.
I remember back in the day, people said the river was so thick with fish that they had to walk on it. Well, when we were doing our work up there, we had to walk on it because there was nowhere else to walk. When the rain came in those years, early rains, and it brought the water level up, these fish went everywhere. Then when the water dropped, there was thousands of them. There was nothing we could do because the river was black. Like from right where the estuary ended, up to 8 kilometers, the river was black. Looked like an oil slick, but it was fish. Side to side, there were so many in there. The river bank of Indian River, I had artifacts. I found artifacts on all these sites. And if they date what they date on this beach, which I've been told are about 3,200 years, the artifacts along here, we've had to been up there that long. I found jade adzes up Indian River's riverbank, which jade is a treated rock into our territory because we can't access it. I've been told that the basalt, the black rock, is the rock that is mainly the tool we used. Anything else you find, like obsidian, which is a volcanic rock, or jade, is either traded into our territory. We've been accessing the Fraser River for as long as we've been accessing Indian River, and there's sites on the Fraser River that are like 7,500 years old. So I think us here, it says 3,200 they can find, but there's a site over in Port Moody Inlet that they've kind of aged to like 9,000 years, I think. And they told us, they think that's us.
It's funny where we're standing, because this was like, where our administration was like we played in the forest here. This was all forest, and there was no houses up this way when I was born. So there was a lot of changes, and there was still
Growing up here as a young girl, and you know, when there were only houses down on Dollarton Highway, and you know, all of this up here was our playground. You know, it was all forest.
that road down there, Gumlai. That was just a train, kind of a dirt road back then.
And that was where we played tag and hide and go seek, and yeah.
You know, growing up for me, we were out all the time. We were, you know, there's probably 40, 50 within an age gap of 10 years, 20 to 12 years. And, you know, playing British Bulldog and hide and go seek throughout the community, and eating wild saskies, and there was orchards with apples and pears and plums. And,
You know, I caught salmon down at McCartney Creek. We caught trout down here at this creek.
and then being on the water. I mean, you know, as the elders say, when the tide goes out, the table was set for dinner.
There was still some life. You know, I was probably on the tail end, but going out on the mud flats, there was still quite a bit of things I couldn't recognize in the tidal pools.
The shellfish were abundant. We could eat the oysters back then. We could eat the clams and mussels, and it was like this feast. And we'd walk out and harvest crabs as much as you needed. You know, we were really blessed. Very tight-knit community. I could have dinner at 5 or 6 of my auntie or uncle's houses at any given night.
Any home I could go in, the door was open. I didn't have to knock. I just say hello. Could have supper at any house.
We did a lot of crazy things. You know, I think of, we didn't have this large gym. We had a small hall, you know, and but we did everything in that little hall. You know, we gathered as a community. You know, we had potluck dinners. We had weddings there. You know, it served our community really well while we had it. And, you know, and there's just so many memories that, you know, my generation and, you know, generations before me and, you know, and a couple that follow after me, you know, we're very blessed to, you know, to be able to carry so many wonderful things that, you know, we were able to do as families.
You know, things have changed, and it's I don't think one way is worse than the other, but we do live in a different world now. And in terms of like how do we pass culture down, that's changed a lot as well. And I think tools like this, like how we're filming today, and writing and the arts, music, theater, dance, you know, all kinds of arts, you know, film, writing, that's all, you know, very important ways for passing our culture down now. Because we don't live in the world that I lived in.
Because we grew up in a time where, you know, some of our older siblings and, you know, some of our parents went to residential school. And, you know, it's things that us, you know, from my generation and down, you know, either weren't aware of or didn't fully understand, because our parents and our siblings didn't talk about it. You know, they didn't talk about what they went through. You know, they carried that with them, and that hurt, and you know, and it came out in really unhealthy forms. And it was stuff that, you know, we didn't understand until, you know, maybe 10 years ago. That, you know, it started to, you know, our aunts and uncles and our siblings started to talk about their experiences and started to heal from them. And I think of all of our family members who, you know, suffered and took that suffering with them to the other side. And I think about, some of our late uncles who have passed away recently, who did a lot of healing from residential school and, and took that healing and those experiences and turned it around into, a lot of good that, that he gave us younger ones.
And I see that trend of healing continuing. And I think if it not for them, we wouldn't be standing here on this. I think my son, Gabriel Jr., said it, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, but when my dad passed away, he talked about how we stand on the shoulders of giants. And we do, and we have to remember that. And I think it's because of them that we're going to step into this new era of prosperity. So many people, so many of our older generation that I just have so much love for. So I feel like I might have went off track there, but yeah.
That's great.
Tsleil-Waututh Nation. What's ism u Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Before I was on council, we had a staff who worked out of a portable here, and there was 4 staff there. There was Auntie Dee, who was the social worker, and there was late Auntie Vivian, who did education, and there was Dwayne George, who was chief at the time, and there was Auntie Gloria, who was receptionist.
The community was tiny. We were still in tiny little trailers like this one to the side of us, and our staff was not even 50 people back then, probably.
We could fit all of our staff around a big boardroom table and talk about strategy. Nobody in the 90s really knew who we were. People could drive through the reserve and not have any idea that they're on our reserve, or even wonder anything about the people that were here.
We had a few departments. That's when our economic development was just starting to grow.
That's where some of our biggest turning around occurred. It's when we got into the marketplace housing. It's when economic development became something more than just an idea. And that's where the partnership building began.
Now you look at us today, we're well over 200 staff here. And a lot of it is because late Uncle Len George had a vision, and that was to bring economic development to our community.
At that time, we were in a deficit when my dad took over as chief of $200,000. It might as well have been 200 million, because we didn't know business at the time. And so we created this operations committee. We had my dad, Leonard George, and Matt Thomas.
I think it was the late 80s into the early 1990s. That's when Len and I hooked up, your grandfather and I hooked up, and we had a talk. And we both had a vision, and it was going in the same direction. And him being a great lobbyist, and me focused on the business side of being, really energetic in that area. We came together, and I really believe it was meant to be at that time, because he always used to say to me, he says, "Yeah, you're like the left brain, and I'm on the right." side of the brain, and we work well together, and he convinced me to run for council. And when I got into council, that's when we opened up the door on economic development. Actually, this driving range here was the very first thing that we did.
And we did market housing on reserve, which was fairly new. People said to my dad, you know, Leonard, you're not going to sell nothing. You couldn't give me the land. You know, lo and behold, we built out, you know, 1,700 units at the far end of our reserve. But that became, you know, own source revenue, obviously, but that became something, the economics impacts the social. And so we've gone from a staff of 2 to 200 plus. Why? Because of the business, because of creating our own economies, taking hold of it ourselves and building it ourselves.
It was the vision of our late uncle, Leonard George, and current director of economic development, Matt Thomas, also along with our current and past leadership, to hopefully one day reawaken the spirit of this land so that it will properly reflect the Tsleil-Waututh Nation's culture, values, priorities, and interests, so that one day our membership can flourish and thrive.
Because over here at Tsleil-Waututh, we've had the history of having really big picture thinking going on. Not just thinking about the Indian Act and not just thinking about what Indian Affairs can do for us, but thinking about how do we put the Tsleil-Waututh Nation face back on our territory. We know more about our land, our territory, than any level of government. How do we protect Tsleil-Waututh rights? How do we protect our title? And how do we be a partnership in all of this?
Wa Shaslamitst Tatamu I Quaquatstut Tashnimash.
We are standing at Tsleil-Waututh, which is facing the wind. This greater area of the inlet and Indian Arm was known to Tsleil-Waututh people as home. This was all a part of our territory that we traveled and lived and hunted and gathered and celebrated life. Back in the time when Tsleil-Waututh people lived on the land, we didn't have all the modern technologies that we do now, and we really leaned on and still drew from the natural world, and that's abiding by how hunting seasons, how the berries grew, and just the laws of the animals as well that lived in our territory.
The Treaty Lands and Resource Department was created in the 90s, mostly through the treaty process with the province. And through that work, we started to really map out our uses of the territory, the different resources that we gathered, where we lived, and just kind of our general uses of the area. And through that work, we realized that our inlet wasn't as healthy as it was before. We weren't harvesting as much as before. People just weren't getting out onto the land and water as much as they were back before industry really started to pollute the waters and the lands of Burrard Inlet. So in my job now, I'm lucky enough to be able to be on the land and putting the nation's face back on our territory through restoration work and protecting the inlet and all the waters and lands that surround it.
We are so close to the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Terminal. I always say it's not in our backyard, but it's in our kitchen sink, because we used to gather over 90% of our diet from the inlet.
Much of the development that happened in Burrard Inlet has hardened about 80% of the shoreline, and that was all done without consultation with Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And so now we're kind of going back and we're softening up these shorelines, we're restoring the estuaries, we're bringing back the salmon, we're bringing back the whales, and we've seen our actions progress into successes, and we've seen the herring come back since the first time since the 1800s, the late 1800s. The numbers of our salmon are increasing in our watershed, despite a lot of salmon stocks declining because of different climate impacts and different environmental impacts. The first time that we've seen killer whales back in our inlets again.
Walking forward with those respects and that type of knowledge is hardwired, I believe, in Tsleil-Waututh people. What you know about the cedar tree and the animals that live around us, and when to hunt them and when to feast and when not to feast, is all a part of that cultural knowledge and how to act.
One of the things that we really look at right now and are really concerned about is climate change and the effects that that has on our traditional plants and medicines. Right now, we're faced with, if I just reflect over the last 2 years, with the heat dome, the forest fires, all those things that are happening has really affected our harvesting. The last year, because of the heat dome, a lot of our indigenous plants didn't thrive. It was too dry and it was too hot to harvest. So we missed out on that harvest season. And now we look at this year, because there's such an abundance of rain and then the floods, a lot of our roots and indigenous plants and medicines have rotted right on the vine or in the ground because of the extreme climate change. So those are real things that we really need to concern ourselves with when we look at going forward, to ensure that we don't lose that traditional way of collection and gathering and harvesting responsibly. We're really working towards, ensuring our members are cared for when it comes to food sustenance.
I grew up off reserve with my grandparents, and I had a house built here in 1990. I don't know that there were any counseling services here at that time. I don't believe there were. And then I was working here part-time as an addictions counselor. Dee George was an addictions counselor as well. She was for a number of years. But as far as I know, that's all that we had. I know as a counselor, I was one of the only ones who was doing counseling as an Indigenous person. In the beginning, there wasn't really anybody else, and we try our best to hire as many as we can. We have good counselors here. I think there's 5 of us now, and we're getting a peer support worker next week as well, so that is really good. There was never this much of a team here, and even just prior to this, there was only 2 of us, so for a while there anyway, so not very many people. And that's something that I have found everywhere, not just here. It's very limited, the number of First Nations counselors, very limited. So that's how I've seen things change here. It's really expanded, and I think it will continue to expand because, as I said before we started, I think that our director, Andrea, is one of the greatest visionaries that I've ever met, and she makes her visions come into reality, which I think is really, really important to do, not just talk about things, but to do them, to make them happen.
We need to inspire and lead with a strength-based approach as opposed to deficit-based approach. When we ask questions from a different lens, potentially, a colonial lens about, you don't have these things in the community, what do you see? What would you want? Right then, we're already, implying that we don't have the strengths in our community. We're already implying that we're in a deficit. We have no way of knowing and being. So we really need to reframe those questions to strength-based by saying, what are our strengths in the community? What is our knowledge? What is our traditional knowledge? What are we currently doing right now that is successful? how do we go forward, and what do we need to do to develop that works for our community? Well, we take that traditional knowledge and we develop a framework, a cultural framework that is going to be embedded in all of our programming to ensure that we're culturally safe, that we're culturally appropriate, in providing programs for our community that are going to make a difference, that are community-based and community-driven.
Te tamoch I te chwelmoch at te him.
War canoe racing is our traditional sport. It's very physical, but it's also very spiritual as well. There's a lot of teachings behind it.
You know, back in the day, our aunts and uncles and relatives here at Tsleil-Waututh were champions, and we were only a nation of 180. I think I was number 181. And we're pulling against nations with 2,000 to 5,000 people sometimes, and they were champions for a long time. But the discipline and the teachings around the canoe, I was blessed in that they took the time and talked about that. You know, when that tree gives itself up and, you know, that canoe is built, it's the spirit of that canoe. You honor that. You leave negativity ashore. You pull together that one heart, one mind, and one spirit.
That's what I want for our youth too, that come to do this. When you're on the water, it's like a prayer almost, like you're just one with the canoe and you're just focusing on the paddle in front of you, keeping your stroke. We always say just being, you know, all together, all one when we're on the canoe. It's very important because, you know, that's what gets the canoe moving, is when you're just exactly at the same time. You have to be all together, and that's the importance here too, is just being a team. So I just want to acknowledge our ancestors as well, who have kept this alive.
You know, our grandparents and a lot of our aunties and uncles had that culture taken from them, you know, through residential school and just other intergenerational traumas. It was stripped from us, kind of thing. But, you know, we're on the come up, and it's like a really good privilege to be able to be a part of that. And my work right now, my main full-time job is the language officer. We create like lessons, curriculum. It's really refreshing. Like, our grandparents and aunties and uncles, you know, they spoke 3 or 4 different languages because of our area and how, like, we're on a really big trade route, you know. It wouldn't be just one language, you know. So I feel like the way that our elders and ancestors tied into our community, and like to be able to kind of carry along the lines of those, is just something that I can, you know, feel very proud of, you know, and just to be able to carry the drum and sing those songs, stories, and stuff like that to carry on. Even though we've lost so much, you know, we still have a lot to give and still a lot to teach too.
There's a lot of trauma that our people went through, and the trauma affects our community, and the language is a great antidote to that. I have no doubts in my mind now. With some of the youth that I work with in language, they're teaching our children now in the daycare, in the schools. They're learning Hunkaminam language, and they're growing up with this language brain. And as they grow, some of them will become fluent speakers. I believe that. Some of our youth will become fluent speakers. I hope that I become a fluent speaker, and that's going to change our community and our way of thinking. Through that, bringing back the language, it's going to bring great healing. And I saw it in our youth. I saw their addictions go down. I saw, you know, their self-esteem and struggles with depression and other issues related to that go down. I saw their self-esteem go up. I saw their pride go up. I saw their light brighten. I saw this firsthand, not just numbers on a book. And it's been a game changer. And I see that trend of healing continuing. And I think the language is an important part of that.
Our weavings are holders of knowledge. Us as weavers are the storytellers. That comes through us, through our hands. And when we go to the loom, you get that feeling like the ancestors are coming to weave through us, and those stories and the oral tradition and the laws come to life. We know that our laws, our teachings, they were held in the stories that the ancestors held and that they passed on from generation to generation. So that oral tradition was very vital to sustaining the knowledge from one generation to another. And we didn't have books or documents. There were pictographs, and there were canoes, and there were paddles and house posts and weavings and our regalia, and all of that comes from, you know, a very deep-rooted connection to the lands and to the waters, and our ancestral ways are all held in that.
You know, the tension of the warps is kind of like knowing your canoe and knowing how to read the waters, right? So there's other ways that it benefits, and then it speaks to you, just like when you're out on the water. So I'm hoping people will learn what is good to them, breaking the learned behavior and learning something new and making it your own.
We started to really have a desire to revive our Coast Salish weaving in Tsleil-Waututh. And when we started to recognize the importance of that and started to recognize the role of weaving in our responsibility to revive who we are and to really understand where we come from, and to start to highlight why that's so important to understand the laws of the land and to recognize and honor that.
I got started with Angela, and she just said, come out, come see me. So I did, and to be honest, I didn't think it would grow as much as it did, as big as it did. Like they said, the loom really speaks to you. I didn't think it would be this magnificent. You can see something and be like inspired instantly to, oh my God, I have to do that. Or for me, I'll see like a little shape and I'm like obsessive about it. Like I have to learn how to do that. I got into it, and then we just kept going, and we just went and went and went. And this is like the biggest piece that I've ever done. And we did it maybe 2 months after I started weaving. I learned so much knowledge and so much information about this in such a 3-month time that I wouldn't have learned anywhere else. So now I understand the magnitude and the magnificence of it, and I probably will never stop. And my daughter, she's 4 months old, she will be doing this with me when she gets older, for sure.
Ni wa ansa wa nem tasnimis.
Tsleil-Waututh Nation has always been a leader and an innovator in Vancouver and as a First Nation in Canada. We have a lot of very strong principles that are reflected in our work. The comprehensive community plan as a whole is really meant to be guided by the entire community. Our hope is that all the work we've done, the testimony we capture in this video, the community engagement we've done through surveys, and the actual written CCP package itself will inform the decisions and actions of current and future leadership in Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Back when we first started to today is like night and day in terms of the strength and what we have now as a people, as a government. We're a small nation, Tsleil-Waututh, in terms of numbers, but we do huge things. And it's the people, it's the members, it's the leadership, it's our youth, it's our elders. They're the ones that make it all happen.
You know, every generation now, with my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, you know, I see, and my nieces and nephews, I just see how they're all flourishing, and, you know, we get healthier with each decade. And it's a really beautiful thing to see, because they're such strong, resilient people that have been through so much, you know, so much. They've been really tried to be destroyed, but they never could do it. And now you see them flourishing. And you know, we're starting now. One of my husband's dreams was to have a school.
We were put on this earth to become the best possible human being that we can. Every child carries a special gift, and it's our job as their parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, teachers, to find what each child's unique strength is, and to be able to teach them in a way that is giving them self-respect, dignity, and courage to be an Indigenous person in this world.
Right now we have 5 directors that are community members. 10 years ago we had 3. So we're scaling up as far as our membership capacity, and we need to pass that down to the next 40-somethings, 30-somethings, so that they can backfill us, so that we can keep Tsleil-Waututh people in the senior management chairs, so we can continue on with the vision and not have to explain what we want and need. We already know it because it's in us.
There is so much power that we can take back that was stolen from us. And all it is every person that gets educated in some way or another is us taking that power back.
We need to go back to our cultural ways, because when you live in your culture, you're a lot stronger. Your mental health is better, your emotional and spiritual health is a lot stronger, especially when you can connect to your ancestors. When we work together, we're a lot stronger. We can accomplish more things when we work as one, rather than when we are working alone.
Where I see Tsleil-Waututh in 30 years.
In 30 years, I see Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
In 30 years, I would love to see,
Where I see Tsleil-Waututh in the next 30 years is that we are independent.
I see us in a place in 30 years where we truly are making our own decisions with no interference.
Really being those decision makers in our territory, that our voices are being heard on the provincial level, on the federal level.
We want to have people in all different types of levels of the government, or just an opinion to work side by side with.
Having those informed discussions with our neighbors, with governments, with nonprofits about how can Tsleil-Waututh be a part of that conversation from the very beginning.
You know, so in 30 years, you know, I'd love to see our people thriving without that status card and without Indian and Northern affairs.
My 30-year vision for Tsleil-Waututh is that we are a healthy, vibrant, active community that is highly engaged in everything that we do here in the community on a day-to-day basis.
Everybody has a strength, everybody has a goal. We just need to uplift those people and kind of shove them in the direction that they want to pursue their future. And we're capable of doing that. I hope people will start coming back and realize that they're a spirit with a body and come back to being human again.
That we have a more clear vision of who our ancestors were and who we, I guess, can be.
Really just growing into a healthier community. My hope for TWN for the next 30 years is to have a place where people feel at home. A lot of members around here grew up expecting their own home, like their parents, a single family home. So that means providing adequate housing. So my hope is to bring as many TWN members home as possible.
I'm not worried about our future because our council and our directors are looking after us. I really have no worries for myself, for my kids, my grandkids, all the people. I think we have no worries in our future.
I see us producing self-revenue. I see us being our own government, being as a whole and running off of renewable energy.
My vision includes each and every child, elder, and community member included and involved and having every opportunity that they deserve for the future. And I believe that the Comprehensive Community Plan, the CCP, is our way forward to achieve those needs and that vision for Tsleil-Waututh.
So, we can do it. I know we can.
So for the future, 30 years, all of this is 30 years in the making. In the next 30 years, it's limitless what our people can do.